In 2013, a radio host asked a six-time MVP a simple question. Who is the greatest basketball player of all time? Michael Jordan or LeBron James? The man on the other end of the line had won more MVP awards than either of them. He had scored more points than anyone in the history of the league. And his answer made the entire basketball world laugh at him. He said a name that most fans under 40 barely recognized. That man was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and the name he gave was Oscar Robertson. In this video, we are going to tell the full story of the boldest claim Kareem ever made, and why nobody believed him. We will walk through a career so statistically absurd that it took the sport half a century to even understand what it was looking at. We will cover the bitterness, the betrayals, the trade that changed everything, and the 2 magical seasons where Kareem got to see the truth up close. Because this is not just a story about basketball statistics. It is a story about how quickly greatness gets forgotten, and about the one legend who refused to let it happen. To understand why Kareem's claim mattered, you first have to understand who was making it. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is not a man prone to hype. He's a historian, an author, a student of the game so serious that he spent his retirement writing about jazz, civil rights, and the Harlem Renaissance. When Kareem talks about basketball history, he isn't guessing. He lived it. He played 20 seasons in the NBA, he won 6 championships and 6 MVP awards. He battled Wilt Chamberlain in one era and mentored Magic Johnson in another. He retired as the league's all-time leading scorer, a record that stood for nearly 4 decades until LeBron James finally passed it. In other words, when it comes to evaluating basketball greatness, there may be no more qualified witness alive. This is a man who shared a locker room with the best point guard of the 60s and the best point guard of the 80s. He guarded Wilt. He was guarded by Moses. He watched Jordan's entire career unfold in real time and lived long enough to analyze LeBron's. And out of all of them, out of every legend he ever saw, played with, or played against, Kareem kept coming back to one name. Over and over. Decade after decade, interview after interview. Oscar Robertson. So the question becomes obvious. Who exactly was Oscar Robertson? And why did the man who saw everything believe he was better than everyone? To answer that, you have to go back to the beginning. And the beginning was not kind. Oscar Palmer Robertson was born on November 24, 1938, in Charlotte, Tennessee, into deep rural poverty. When he was still a young boy, his family moved north to Indianapolis, chasing work and a better life. What they found was a city as rigidly segregated as anywhere in the South. The Robertsons settled in a housing project on the west side of the city, and Oscar grew up without money, without privilege, and in the early days, without even a real basketball. He learned the game by wrapping rags around an old tennis ball, held together with rubber bands, and shooting it into a peach basket behind the family home. Think about that for a second. The man who would one day be called the most complete player in basketball history started out shooting garbage into garbage. When he finally got his hands on a real ball, he treated it like treasure. Indianapolis in the 1950s was basketball country. Hoosier hysteria. The high school state tournament was a religion, but that religion had a color line running straight through it. Oscar attended Crispus Attucks High School, an all-black school built by the city specifically to keep black students out of white classrooms. For years, schools like Attucks were not even allowed to compete for the state championship. By the time Oscar arrived, that had changed. And what happened next shook the entire state. In 1955, with Oscar leading the way as a junior, Crispus Attucks won the Indiana State Championship. It was a historic moment. The first all-black school in America to win an open state title. The next year, they did it again, this time going undefeated. Oscar was the best high school player in the state, maybe the country, and his team had just achieved something no one could deny. But Indianapolis found a way to deny it anyway. Traditionally, state champions were celebrated with a victory parade through the heart of downtown, ending with a bonfire celebration at Monument Circle. When the white schools won, that's what they got. When Attucks won, city officials rerouted the celebration away from downtown and out toward the black side of the city. The official concern, whispered and implied, was that a celebration of black excellence in the center of Indianapolis might get out of hand. Oscar never forgot that. Decades later, he would still talk about it with an edge in his voice. His team had done everything right. They had won everything there was to win. And their own city treated their triumph like a threat. Consider what those Attucks teams actually accomplished, because the achievement gets flattened by time. This was a school the city of Indianapolis had literally built to segregate its black students, staffed it with brilliant teachers who couldn't get hired anywhere else precisely because of the color of their skin, and then watched in discomfort as those students turned the place into a powerhouse. The 1956 team didn't just win. They went 31-0, the first team in Indiana history to finish a season completely undefeated. They didn't sneak past anyone. They dismantled the entire state. And at the center of it was a lean, unstoppable teenager who could already do everything on a basketball court that grown men in the professional ranks couldn't. There's a version of this story where that kind of dominance earns a young man the keys to the city. Instead, Oscar learned the opposite lesson. He learned that being twice as good bought you the right to be treated half as well, that no amount of winning would ever fully cash in the way it did for others. It was a lesson the sport itself would spend the next several decades reinforcing, and it planted the seed of the fighter Oscar would later become, both on the court and, far more importantly, in a courtroom. That experience forged something in Oscar Robertson: a wariness, a refusal to perform gratitude, a cold, burning drive to be so undeniably good that no one could ever take anything from him again. Reporters would later call him aloof, prickly, difficult. What they were actually describing was a man who had learned at 16 years old exactly how conditional America's love could be. From Attucks, Oscar went to the University of Cincinnati, and if high school made him a local legend, college made him a national phenomenon. The numbers he put up as a Bearcat are almost hard to believe. He led the entire nation in scoring 3 straight seasons. He was named National Player of the Year 3 times. He averaged 33.8 points per game for his college career at a time when there was no three-point line and no shot clock urgency to inflate anything. He wasn't just the best player in college basketball. He was the best by a distance that made the sport look broken. And yet the indignities never stopped. When Cincinnati traveled to play games in the South, Oscar couldn't stay in the same hotels as his white teammates. He slept in college dormitories while the rest of the team checked in downtown. He heard the slurs from the stands. He saw the signs. He carried his team to national prominence for a school and a city that would not let him eat in half its restaurants. By the time he finished college, Oscar Robertson was the most complete basketball prospect anyone had ever seen. Big for a guard at 6'5", strong like a forward, a scorer, a passer, a rebounder, a leader. In 1960, he co-captained the United States Olympic team alongside Jerry West in Rome, a team so loaded it's still considered one of the greatest amateur squads ever assembled. They won gold without breaking a sweat. Then the Cincinnati Royals made him a territorial pick, and the professional career began. And this is where the story goes from impressive to genuinely absurd. Oscar Robertson entered the NBA in 1960, and from his very first game, he played like a man who had been in the league for a decade. As a rookie, he averaged 30.5 points, 10.1 rebounds, and 9.7 assists. For most players, that would be the season of a lifetime. For Oscar, it was a warm-up. Because in his second season, in 1961 and 1962, Oscar Robertson did something that no player in the history of the league had ever done, and that no player would do again for 55 years. He averaged a triple-double for the entire season, not a game, not a week. A whole year, 30.8 points, 12.5 rebounds, 11.4 assists. Every single night, on average, in double figures across all three categories. To understand how insane that is, you have to understand what a triple-double actually represents. It means you are one of the best scorers, one of the best rebounders, and one of the best passers on the floor, all at the same time, all game long. Players build entire Hall of Fame careers on getting a handful of triple-doubles in a season. Oscar averaged one for a year, and when Russell Westbrook finally matched the feat in 2017, the entire sports world lost its mind, ran documentaries, and treated it as one of the greatest individual achievements in modern basketball. Oscar did it when Eisenhower was president, and most fans had no idea. And here's the part that even hardcore fans miss. That one season wasn't a fluke. It wasn't Oscar catching lightning in a bottle. Look at his first 5 seasons combined, and the average comes out to roughly a triple-double across the entire span. More than 400 games of averaging double figures in points, rebounds, and assists. He didn't have a triple-double season. He had a triple-double half-decade. The league just didn't have the language to describe it yet. So why isn't Oscar Robertson a household name on the level of Jordan or Magic or Bird? Why did an entire generation grow up not really knowing who the Big O was? The answer is heartbreaking, and it's the key to this whole story. Oscar Robertson spent the prime of his career on losing teams. The Cincinnati Royals were, to put it kindly, poorly run. Oscar was surrounded by decent players and one other legend, Jerry Lucas, but the front office never built a true contender around him. And standing directly in his path, year after year, was the greatest dynasty in the history of American team sports. The Boston Celtics, Bill Russell's Celtics, the team that won 11 championships in 13 years. No matter how brilliant Oscar was, no matter how many triple-doubles he stacked up, there was always a green wall waiting in the playoffs. Great individual numbers on a team that doesn't win championships have a way of disappearing from history. Winning is what gets remembered. Rings are what get counted. And for the first decade of his career, Oscar Robertson, the most complete player alive, had exactly 0. It's worth sitting with how cruel that timing was. Oscar entered the league in 1960, right into the teeth of the greatest run any franchise has ever assembled. The Celtics won the title in 1959, 1960, 1961, 1962, 1963, 1964, 1965, 1966, and after a one-year interruption, again in 1968 and 1969. Boston owned the entire decade, and the path to a championship in the eastern half of the league ran directly through that dynasty, which meant that Oscar, at the absolute peak of his physical powers, kept slamming into a team that had Bill Russell anchoring the defense and a roster stacked with Hall of Famers around him. The Royals, for their part, were never quite good enough to break through. There were flashes. There were seasons where Oscar dragged them into the playoffs and gave the Celtics a real scare. But the front office kept making the kinds of decisions that keep a franchise stuck in the middle. They never surrounded him with a second star who could carry the load in the moments Oscar couldn't be everywhere at once. And so the most complete guard in history spent his prime putting up numbers that should have defined an era in the service of teams that history has almost entirely erased. If you want to understand why Oscar Robertson is not a household name, this is the beginning of the answer. Greatness on a treadmill looks from a distance like it is going nowhere. Then in 1969, the Royals made a decision that would define the rest of Oscar's story. They hired a new head coach, and not just any coach. They hired Bob Cousy. Cousy was a Celtics legend, one of the greatest guards of the previous generation, and by the accounts of nearly everyone involved, he did not want Oscar Robertson on his team. The relationship curdled almost immediately. Cousy wanted to build a young, fast-running team. and he seemed to view the aging superstar as an obstacle rather than an asset. He even tried to trade Oscar to the Baltimore Bullets, a deal Oscar vetoed using a clause in his contract. The tension spilled into the newspapers. It got ugly, and Oscar, proud as ever, made it clear he would never play another game for the Royals under those conditions. Something had to give. So in April of 1970, the Cincinnati Royals traded Oscar Robertson. They shipped one of the 10 greatest players who ever lived, their franchise cornerstone, the man who had put their city on the basketball map, to the Milwaukee Bucks. And in return, they received 2 players named Flynn Robinson and Charlie Paulk. That's it. That was the return for the Big O. It stands as one of the most lopsided trades in the history of the sport. A deal so bad it almost defies explanation, driven not by basketball logic, but by a coach's ego and an owner's unwillingness to pay what a legend was worth. And it was the best thing that ever happened to Oscar Robertson. Because waiting for him in Milwaukee was a 22-year-old giant in only his second professional season. A young man who had just been the most dominant college player in America, who had already been named Rookie of the Year, and who was about to become the most unstoppable offensive force the game had ever seen. His name, at the time, was Lou Alcindor. The world would soon know him as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. For the first time in his career, Oscar Robertson had a true superstar partner. And for the first time in his career, Kareem had a floor general who understood exactly how to run an offense, who could read the game 2 steps ahead of everyone else, who could get him the ball in the perfect spot at the perfect time. It was a match made in basketball heaven, and the results were immediate and devastating. The 1970 and 1971 Milwaukee Bucks won 66 games. They tore through the regular season like a machine, and in the playoffs, they were even more terrifying, losing only 2 games in the entire postseason on their way to the title. In the finals, they swept the Baltimore Bullets in 4 straight. Kareem was named Finals MVP, and Oscar Robertson, in his 11th season, finally at long last got his ring. This is the moment that matters most for our story, because this is where Kareem got his first-hand education in the greatness of Oscar Robertson. He didn't read about it. He didn't watch old film. He lived it. Every day in practice, every night in games, he got to see up close what it felt like to play alongside the most complete guard in history, even a version of Oscar that was past his physical prime. Remember the context here. Kareem was a young phenom who had just spent his rookie season as the best player on a good team, carrying an enormous offensive burden almost by himself. He knew he was great. What he didn't yet fully understand was what a truly complete floor general could unlock. Then Oscar arrived, and the whole game slowed down and clarified. The double teams that used to swarm Kareem suddenly had a price, because there was a passer on the floor who would make you pay for every one of them. The tough possessions in the 4th quarter suddenly had a release valve because there was a veteran who had seen every situation the game could throw at him and knew exactly what to do. Kareem went from being a spectacular young scorer to being the centerpiece of a champion. And a huge part of the reason was the man bringing the ball up the floor beside him. That's an experience you don't forget. That's the kind of thing that lodges in a competitor's memory and stays there for the rest of his life. Kareem would go on to play with Magic Johnson, arguably the greatest pure point guard the game ever produced, and win 5 more titles. He had every reason in the world to name Magic as the best he ever saw. But he kept coming back to Oscar, and the reason is that Oscar had shown him something at the very start of his career that recalibrated his entire understanding of what a guard could be. And what Kareem saw stuck with him for the next 50 years. He saw a player who never needed a play called for him, but could take over whenever he wanted. He saw a guard strong enough to bully men much bigger than him, to box out and grab rebounds against forwards and centers, to post up smaller defenders and score at will. He saw a mind that processed the game like a computer, that knew where every player was going to be before they got there, that could dissect a defense with a single pass. He saw a competitor who had been humiliated, doubted, and disrespected his entire life, and who channeled all of it into a relentless, business-like dominance. No flair, no wasted motion, no highlights for the sake of highlights, just a machine that produced points, rebounds, and assists in devastating quantities and won you a championship. Kareem would later describe it perfectly. He said Oscar had brains, he had all the skills, he could rebound and box out guys 4 and 6 inches taller than him. He was ruggedly built, he had fluid quickness and just understood the game. No flair, Kareem said. He just got the job done every night. That last line is the whole story. He just got the job done every night. In an era that would come to worship flash and spectacle and viral moments, Oscar Robertson was the ultimate anti-highlight. He was substance without style, production without theater. And that, more than anything, is why history let him slip away. Oscar played 3 more seasons in Milwaukee, reaching the finals again in 1974 before losing a brutal 7-game series to the Celtics. Then he retired. His career numbers, when they were finally tallied, told a story that should have ended every argument forever. 25.7 points per game, 9.5 assists per game, 7.5 rebounds per game for his entire career, an MVP award, a championship, 12 All-Star selections, and that impossible, untouchable triple-double season that stood alone for more than half a century. By any reasonable measure, Oscar Robertson had a top 5, top 10 resume in the history of the sport. And then the world forgot him. The 70s gave way to the 80s, and the NBA found its saviors in Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. The 80s gave way to the 90s, and the entire planet fell in love with Michael Jordan. The 2000s brought Kobe, the 2010s brought LeBron. Each new era crowned its own king, and each new generation of fans assumed that basketball history basically started the moment they began watching. The players of the 60s became footnotes, grainy relics, names on a list of old records that surely couldn't compare to the athletic gods of the modern game. Oscar Robertson became a trivia answer. The guy who averaged a triple-double once, a long time ago. A piece of black and white nostalgia. Respected in the abstract, ignored in every actual conversation about who was truly great. Everyone accepted this. Everyone moved on. Everyone except Kareem. Because Kareem had been there. Kareem knew what the highlight reels couldn't show. Kareem understood that the reason Oscar didn't look flashy on old film was the same reason a master craftsman doesn't look flashy. There was no wasted movement because there was no need for it. And so, whenever anyone asked, Kareem told the truth as he saw it, no matter how much it made people roll their eyes. In 2013, sitting on a national radio show, he was asked the ultimate question: Jordan or LeBron, the greatest of all time? And Kareem, without hesitation, said that Oscar Robertson would have kicked them both in the behind. Absolutely. He said Oscar was awesome, that he had brains and all the skills and could do things neither of them could do. Then he asked the question that cut to the heart of it. Who else, he wondered, was going to average double figures in points, assists, and rebounds for an entire season? The reaction was exactly what you'd expect. Fans laughed. Analysts scoffed. Social media wrote it off as an old man being loyal to his old teammate. Just another legend from a bygone era refusing to accept that the modern game had passed his heroes by. It was treated as a sweet, sentimental, slightly delusional opinion. Nobody took it seriously. And then, slowly, the game itself started making Kareem's case for him. The first crack came in the numbers. As the modern NBA evolved, As pace increased and offenses opened up and analytics took over, a strange thing happened. Triple-doubles, once treated as freakish rarities, started becoming a central measure of all-around greatness. And when the league went looking for the standard, the benchmark, the ceiling, it kept arriving at the same place: Oscar Robertson. His name was on the record that everyone was chasing. His season was the mountain no one could climb. Then, in 2017, Russell Westbrook climbed it. He averaged a triple-double for a full season, 31 points, 10 rebounds, 10 assists, and the basketball world erupted. It was hailed as one of the most remarkable individual seasons ever. Westbrook won the MVP for it. And in the middle of all that celebration, one name kept coming up, spoken now with a new kind of reverence. Because for the first time, people truly grasped what Oscar had done. It had taken the single greatest athletic explosion of the modern era, a physical marvel playing at 100 miles an hour, to match a number that a guard from the 1960s had put up while wearing tiny shorts and canvas sneakers on a losing team. And Oscar hadn't done it once by accident. He'd essentially done it for 5 straight years. Suddenly, the old footage looked different. Suddenly, the joke wasn't so funny. The second crack came in how the game came to be played. For decades, the ideal was specialization. You were a scorer, or a passer, or a rebounder. Point guards were small and quick and stayed on the perimeter. Big men lived under the basket. The positions were fixed, the roles were rigid, and that was simply how basketball worked. Then the modern NBA blew all of that up. The most coveted player in today's game is the big, versatile playmaker, the point forward, the oversized guard who can bring the ball up, run the offense, post up a smaller defender, grab rebounds in traffic, and control everything on the floor. Teams now spend hundreds of millions of dollars searching for players who can do a little bit of everything from a big frame. In other words, the entire league spent 30 years evolving toward a template. And that template was Oscar Robertson. He was a 6'5" guard playing point in an era of 6'1" guards. He was posting up, boxing out, and running the offense all at once when everyone told him a guard wasn't supposed to do those things. He wasn't behind his time. He was decades ahead of it. The game didn't pass Oscar by. It took 50 years to finally catch up to where he already was. This is what Kareem understood that nobody else did. He wasn't being nostalgic. He was being accurate. He was looking at Oscar Robertson through the lens of what basketball would eventually become, because he had already seen a player who was built that way. He knew that if you dropped a prime Oscar Robertson into the modern game, with modern spacing and modern rules and no green wall of Celtics standing in his way, the numbers he'd put up would be legendary. Kareem wasn't overrating an old friend. He was the only one in the room who correctly rated him. And it went beyond the court too. Because the version of the NBA that laughed at Kareem's opinion, the glamorous, player-empowered, superstar-driven league where athletes make hundreds of millions and choose where they want to play, that entire world exists because of Oscar Robertson. In 1970, the same year he was traded to Milwaukee, Oscar was serving as president of the Players' Union. And he put his name on a lawsuit against the NBA itself. It became known as the Oscar Robertson Rule. He fought to end the reserve clause, the system that bound a player to one team for life, that let owners control a man's career like property. He fought to block a merger that would have crushed player salaries. He risked his own standing, faced threats and pressure and open hostility, and he refused to back down. The suit dragged on for 6 years. It was finally settled in 1976, and it changed professional basketball forever. It gave birth to free agency. Every player who has ever signed a massive contract, every star who has ever chosen his own destination, every athlete who has ever had the freedom to control his own career owes a debt to the Big O. He didn't just play the modern game before it existed, he built the conditions that made the modern game possible. And you have to understand the courage that took, because it's easy to gloss over from the comfort of the present. Oscar wasn't a bench player with nothing to lose. He was the president of the union and the face of the lawsuit, which meant he was the single most visible target for the owner's fury. He was warned, he was pressured. There was open talk that a man who challenged the league this directly might find his career mysteriously cut short, might find doors closed, might be quietly punished for daring to treat the owners as equals rather than masters. Many players wanted the reforms but were terrified to attach their names to the fight. Oscar attached his name to the top of the document. He became the first African-American president of any major national sports or entertainment labor union. And he used that position not to protect himself, but to put his own future on the line for men he'd never meet, players who wouldn't even be born until decades after he retired. The settlement chipped away at the reserve clause, the mechanism that had bound a player to one team for as long as that team wanted him, at whatever price the team decided to pay. It was, in the plainest terms, a challenge to a system that treated grown men like inventory. And Oscar won. The very players who would one day be too young to remember him play, who would sign contracts worth more than the entire Royals franchise had been worth in his day, were cashing checks his fight made possible. So think about the full picture. Here is a man who invented the statistical template that the league now worships, who pioneered the physical archetype that teams now pay fortunes to find, who won the legal battle that gave players their freedom, and who did all of it while being told at every stage of his life that he was too black, too proud, too difficult, too old, too out of touch to matter. And here is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the most credentialed witness in basketball history, standing up year after year and calmly insisting that this man was better than the icons everyone else worshipped, getting laughed at for it, and being proven right, quietly, relentlessly, by the very sport that had forgotten him. Nobody believed Kareem. They thought it was loyalty. They thought it was old age. They thought it was a legend clinging to his era. But Kareem wasn't clinging to the past. He was describing the future. He had shared a floor with Oscar Robertson, and he had seen, with his own eyes, a player so complete that it would take the NBA half a century to build another one like him and then celebrate it as a miracle. That's the thing about being right too early. It looks exactly like being wrong. Kareem made his case decades before the evidence caught up, and so the world dismissed him. But the evidence did catch up. It always does. The triple-double became the standard, the point forward became the prototype, free agency became the foundation, and one by one, every argument Kareem had been making came true. Oscar Robertson never got the crown. He probably never will, not in the way Jordan and LeBron wear it. He's too old, too grainy, too far removed from the fans who decide these things now, but that was never really the point. The point is that one man who saw everything, who had every reason to praise his more famous teammates and his more marketable peers, chose instead to keep telling an unpopular truth about a forgotten legend. Kareem was right about Oscar Robertson. It just took the rest of us 50 years to finally understand what he'd been trying to tell us all along. Like and subscribe for more stories about the legends the history books forgot. Until next time.